Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we're going to be going over an interview that Yoshi-P did with Game Watch. Whenever there's any sort of major event, a new patch, a live letter, or a fan fest in this case, it's not too uncommon to see a bunch of interviews pop up, especially with Japanese media. They've often done roundtables or things in the past, or group media interviews where we just get a bunch of different information from a bunch of different outlets that all kind of gets consolidated into one thing. This interview with Game Watch, however, we have a full link to it in the description of the video, and also thank you to Miyuna. Their translation over on the Final Fantasy XIV Reddit Discord is what we're actually using for this video. I'll include a link to that because I make a ton of videos about that stuff, but you can also just get the information from the source if you're in their Discord. You know, just check the translations and live letter feed occasionally, and you'll find that I often make videos on that stuff. So with that, however, check the description. Let's get started. Alright, so the first little bit here is about the new job Reaper. Now, they're not going to give us anything too in-depth, and we're going to actually dive a little bit deeper into that statement after we go over the first couple of bullet points. They say you attack while in melee distance, in case you didn't know. You accumulate gauge, and that allows you to fight with your avatar. It's a design focused on building up hype during the battle. I mean, that sounds like most other jobs in the game. You hit the boss, you get gauge, you do something cool. I mean, I could boil most things down to that at the end of the day, so no real surprise there. Even it reiterates later, you know, basically keep attacking to build gauge and then decide where to use your avatar. You know, again, just reiterating pretty much the same thing. Now, Final Fantasy XI vets, this one is particularly for you / us, as someone who has played quite a bit of Final Fantasy XI. They have a bunch of team members who played Final Fantasy XI. There's things they want to keep in mind and respect, specifically about the Scythe. But they said if they were to implement it half-hearted, it would be disappointing. So the things they went in an original direction with. I'm not surprised. The way Final Fantasy XI often does some of their more major skills, the early levels have some really basic animations, and then as you level up, they start to reuse those animations, maybe add a second attack to it, maybe add some crazy particle effects. But even at end game, with some of the craziest and coolest looking weapon skills, they often reuse animations from the lower levels. They can't do that all too much in Final Fantasy XIV. I mean, look at all the other jobs and how diverse the animations are. So it's not too surprising, and we do get a good idea of that from the Reaper teaser itself. So just glad to see that they're trying to be faithful, but they're not trying to be too faithful to the point where it doesn't look nearly as cool as it could. Now, another thing specifically about the Warrior of Light being possessed by the Avatar, we see that in the teaser, and then they're glowing red and evil looking. They don't want to talk about it too much because they don't know if that's going to be final. So there's a chance that we don't even see that by the time Reaper actually comes out. I have a feeling it'll stay because a bunch of people went, that's cool. But this is something that I feel the need to reiterate a lot. There were people who were upset we didn't get a job action trailer at FanFest and expect that maybe we'll get one soon. We're not going to. Job action trailers usually are within, 6 weeks-ish of an expansion launch. And so now that we know there's going to be a media tour in September, October-ish, don't expect it till the media tour has concluded and right before media tour information starts hitting the internet, because that's how they've done it in the past. Not to mention, if they were to release it this soon, it'd be stuff that's probably even 2 months older in terms of build accuracy to, what it is we'd be getting now. I mean, it'd basically be like a 7-8 month old build of the job. And that's not great for us because I'm sure animations aren't entirely finished yet. Their gauge values that we usually see in those kind of things aren't done. And I'm sure that everything about it just is so subject to change, it just wouldn't make sense. And I know we really want to see some of the crazier things, but it's going to have to wait. I just feel like this is a good time to remind people of that. So please be patient. Please look forward to it. Hi. Another thing that I found really interesting about this is Reaper is not a pet job and is different from Summoner and Machinist. First of all, Machinist? I get that we have the Queen that evolves from the turrets, but I never once even considered them a pet job. I guess that makes Dark Knight a pet job too, with the Shadow? I don't know. I'm just surprised to see it on there, but Summoner is the interesting bit. Before FanFest, I predicted Eggies would be going away entirely, and that summon attacks would be integrated into the summoner's animations themselves. So instead of using Ifrit Eggie to, from a distance, you command him to do something, he does this little slap on the enemy. Then instead, maybe you could actually summon a larger version of Ifrit out of yourself and do an attack with him from close range or something along those lines. Or with Garuda, Aerial Blast, all the different skills. But essentially, what Reaper looks like it's going to do, where they channel that ether through themselves. After I saw that, I was less confident they were going to do that. after reading this, I'm even less confident in my prediction. I don't think that's what they're going to do. Now, maybe even with a change like that, they would still have Demi-Bahamut and Demi-Phoenix. And maybe that differentiates them enough to the point where we can kind of still have a Reaper-esque system for Summoner while still having those big major pets that people have really come to identify the job with in the previous years. But I personally am kind of retracting that prediction. I think they'll just maybe improve the pet system, you know. Whatever it is, the fact that it is halting, is making them halt Eggy Glamour production, not that I'm sure they've actually been working on it in the first place, that's the statement that's going to be running with people. So get your predictions going, get your speculation going, because now, as far as I'm concerned, it's even more Wild Wild West than it was before. They also don't want to comment if it's a pure or synergy DPS Reaper, that is. Going to keep that a secret for now, probably because it's still being balanced and they don't know. So, makes sense to me. And they only have one sort of avatar, in case you thought they might have an army of Void Sent. The next bit is about male Viera. For me, this, along with the Oceania Data Center, were the two biggest shocks of FanFest. This, I was very, very surprised about. I spoke to Yoshi-P to his face 2 years ago, after we learned male Viera and female Hrothgar weren't going to be a thing. And I asked if we'd ever see them. And he said he didn't know. They needed to, you know, improve their workflow. They needed to check feedback. And, you know, there were so many little elements they needed to work on that it just didn't sound like a confident yes. And you know what? It probably wasn't. But over the last couple of years, I guess they achieved all those things because we're getting it. It's an original creation from the Final Fantasy XIV team, but I do wonder how much Matsuno has to say about this. He does work with the 14 team. He writes all the lore for all of our Ivalice related stuff. As the father of Ivalice and as Viera are part of that, I'd have to imagine he had some sort of input on that. But he's not mentioned anywhere here, so I hope we learn a little bit more about how Matsuno feels about male Viera and if he had any sort of, I guess, influence on the approval of them or anything along those lines. I hope we learn about that in the future. They based it a lot on the artwork of the female Viera. They made sure that it looks and feels different than just like a taller male Makote. And that's in line with what he said a couple years ago. Like, you know, how do we really go about designing this? You know, we're too afraid we're going to be just combining features from the other races in order to make this work instead of it feeling like its own race. So it seems that they have still considered that. They've kept that consistency and that they have delivered such a thing. They also confirmed something we already knew from the FanFest, that they will be introducing female Hrothgar. They said during the FanFest that male Viera are done first. They're already done. So instead of waiting till they're both done to release them, they're just going to release male Viera on their own and female Hrothgar will come later. I think it'll take all the way up to 7.0 before we see it. Some of you I know are optimistic that we'll see it before. I wouldn't be that surprised, actually. But my prediction is going to be 7.0. So, you know, pen that down, hold me to it. And when I'm wrong, you get to be right. Male Viera are rare, but I don't want to say they will never appear as NPCs, but if they do, they'll make sure it fits the setting. But there's no, like, giant town or village with a ton of male Viera. Yeah, male Viera are super rare in the lore. I think there's only really one other subculture of a race that we can play that's really as rare. And I believe it's Keepers of the Moon for Mikote, the male Mikote in them, and they're actually very similar to male Viera in a lot of ways. But yeah, it's just... it may be a while before we see them as part of the MSQ. I remember there was another interview, I feel like in the past couple of days, where they mentioned how they'd actually like change the lore a little bit or like update the lore so that it made sense as to why we even saw them at all, like as warriors of light, as people in major cities with their rarities. So I guess we'll just have to find out what they do to it. But we'll be covering that in a separate video anyway. Now about the 6.0 story, every time they want to talk about this, I just want it right now. So as an expansion, Endwalker is going to have the most voice acting, most cutscenes. It's a finale. I'm not surprised, but that's a lot because, you know, Shadowbringers does a lot of both of those things as well. Since it's a conclusion, there's going to be all sorts of different NPCs, but that doesn't mean they're going to forcefully integrate every single NPC we've met. That's not too surprising because that can really muddy the story and make it lose its pacing and its focus, even with the extra voicing and cutscenes. But I'm sure that's going to mean some people have favorites that they wish were in it that aren't really as present. We even know that they said they weren't going to say Gaius was going to be like a main character, but they also weren't going to say that he wasn't going to be present. So he'll probably appear, we'll probably speak to him, but he's not going to be like, you know, he's not in the cinematic, so who cares, right? No. He's probably just not going to be as like in the forefront as maybe some people are expecting Gaius would be. Viera, who's in the trailer, will actually be very important to the story. They're not going to tell us how, but I'm super interested because I've been waiting to see the two remaining dragons from the first brood. We now just have to see Azdaja. We've seen all 7. and I'm really interested to see what Viera is like and what their lore is like. Now, moving past 6.0 and 6.x, 6.1 and onward, it's going to be a completely new story, starring the main character, the Warrior of Light, you and I, essentially. Now, they've already started to conceptualize this. You know, they have an idea of who they want to travel alongside us, for example, but they actually say the way Endwalker is received could definitely change that. If there's characters that people really, really like and want more of, they may make them accompany us, assuming they live. I expect Grawha will probably live through this, and I doubt he's only going on one more adventure with us. He wants a whole story. He's going to be our new Alphino, because, well, the expansion's based on, has a lot of Final Fantasy IV references, and, well, Final Fantasy IV and Twins, I don't need to say anything else. We're going to move on from that. But, yeah, if you like a character, scream, and you might get more of them after Endwalker. And finally, this last little bit is about the Island Sanctuary. The first two things we already knew. You know, you don't need crafting or gathering, but you might be able to use them for things that help. You know, I'd imagine gathering and crafting items that you can actually use on the island is not all that uncommon. You could also buy those things, I'd assume, but being able to be self-sufficient is always kind of an advantage in its own way. But you can still play it if you're just a Disciple of War, Disciple of Magic style player. The final little bit here is something they'll probably be repeating a lot. They really don't want any sort of competitive aspects with Island Sanctuary. They don't want to feel like you have to compete against, you know, your friend or your FC mate or whatever. They want it to be play at your own pace, have fun, find your own satisfaction, and just enjoy it. So don't expect anything that makes you kind of, you know, jealous of your friend. Just keep working at it. And if you want something, you'll get it and you'll be able to do whatever you want. I still want to know if it's completely instanced for every player, because if it is, I'm really going to be wondering about housing and why it is the way that it is. Or if you can actually see other players on the island and just bits of it are instanced to us individually. You know, maybe that'll be the case. So either way, that covers the end of the Game Watch interview. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. Realistically, while I was planning on making a video for this, I just got a new computer and I wanted to test out the recording, OBS, make sure everything was working, and everything seems to be fine. So hopefully that means I will have way less headaches going into the next several weeks, because I've had some pretty bad ones as of late. With that, thank you again for watching. I'll see you all in the next video, and until then, take care.